My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask your pardon for my sins and the grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. In today's Gospel, we have a rather painful moment where we hear Jesus severely criticizing the Pharisees about what he calls their human traditions. We can just hear his voice, his tone. If we heard it, we'd hear a pain, maybe a tone of severity, but not anger, not frustration. He was not subject to those out of control emotional upheavals, because he saw their minds and he saw how attached they were to these what we call human traditions, that the importance they gave was just disproportionate, so that it was a moment of deep concern for him, and he wanted to correct this. These human traditions, why was this so serious to him, for him to be sort of severe like that? Because he sees them prioritizing traditions that had been added over the centuries over God's commandments, particularly with regards to ritual hand washing before meals and other things like that. And he seems to point out that their adherence to these traditions, make their worship vain, and leads them to actually neglect the essential moral duties, such as honoring their parents. They got around sacred duties with a pretense of serving God, when it really was about protecting a kind of niche for themselves. He says they neglected the weightier matters of the law, like justice, like mercy, like faithfulness. For them, human traditions became the primary focus, and their hearts had become quite hardened to the true love of God, like the essentials, of love of God, of true justice. Obviously, Jesus wasn't trying to abolish the law, but he was trying to liberate it from all this casuistry that they had developed with layers and layers of kind of obsessive detail. These things were not really done out of love. They were done meticulously. But their hearts were hardened. Pope Benedict in a homily mentioned how they used the law as a weapon against the spirit of the law. They used God's rules to avoid God's love. And it could happen to us, when our faith becomes a matter of simply performing human traditions correctly, maybe minutely, maybe according to some rigorous system. It could cease to be an actual relationship with the living God and become a kind of human-centered social system. Imagine getting obsessed with secondary things and ultimately blind to the essentials. So when the Lord speaks about traditions or, quote, works, he's really specifically referring to what you might call identity markers for the people of Israel, like circumcision, dietary laws, ritual washings. There were many, many of these, and these had become like walls between the people. They did this because it's what made them identify as Jews. They were different from others because they had different dietary laws. These traditions were meant to protect Israel's identity. But they became human traditions when they were used to kind of block the universal call of God's love to all nations, including the Gentiles. It's like saying those who don't wash their hands, before meals they can't be holy. They can't fall into God's plan. And Jesus says this kind of worship, like only fixating on ritual washings, dietary rules and all that, you're worshiping in vain, he's saying. Imagine that phrase, worshiping in vain. I mean, it sounds awful, when your words are empty, as though you had no hold on God's heart. It could happen, the danger we think that we're okay because we follow rules, but our hearts are still far from God. We could be, quote unquote, religious in our traditions, but atheists in our daily lives. We can't see the love of God in our daily lives. It's not enough for us to be satisfied with just following certain rules and being externally correct, but then ending up in a kind of empty worship. There's that joke you probably heard, like that pickpocket who was on a bus and he was trying to swipe somebody's wallet on the bus, right? And he's about to insert his hand into the man's pocket, and just at that moment the man turns around, and it turns out it's a priest. He was trying to pickpocket a priest. He didn't even know it. And the pickpocket was so shocked. Oh, sorry, Father. I'm really sorry. I didn't know you were a priest. I really didn't know. I'm really sorry about that. And he's, apologizing profusely. And so they get off the bus, and the priest, tries to calm him. And, he's trying to gently joke with this thief whom he's trying to now kind of win over a little bit from his bad habits, And bit by bit, they start talking about other stuff, and he's trying to put him at ease. And the priest pulls out a cigarette, right? It's like in the days of when people used to smoke cigarettes a lot. And he offers the thief a cigarette, and the thief said, "Oh no, Father, it's okay. I gave up smoking for Lent. Gave up smoking." Well, of course, it was good that he offered giving up smoking for Lent. But wouldn't that be in vain if he did not focus on justice, not stealing from people? I mean, maybe that's exaggerated, but you understand, the tradition of the elders becomes problematic when it leads to a kind of religious narcissism, where one is more concerned with one's own external performance or of the law without the actual person of God himself. Pope Benedict, he spoke about this word traditionalism, not tradition, but traditionalism, which he defined as the dead faith of the living, whereas true tradition is the living faith of the dead. The dead transmit their living faith, but if you only are on externals, on what is visible, or certain rules, or, sort of the rubrics, so to speak, your faith could still be dead. Lord, I don't want my faith to be dead. Now with Lent coming up around the corner, well, maybe we can offer up some sacrifices. If you smoke, you can give up smoking. Or you can forego dessert. Or forego beer, or candy, or chocolate. Okay, that's good. What use is it if you never put aside time to really pray? Extra time, maybe. Or go more to Mass, give more time to Mass. Or if you don't forgive, or offer the sacrifice of work really well done out of love. Imagine if you were to, during Lent, forgo beer and forgo dessert and all those good things, but you didn't forgive those who lived with you, and you kept the resentment, That would turn those things into human traditions. Even you might decide to listen during Lent, to listen to 10 minutes with Jesus every day. But it must not just be press play in the car. It must also be press pray. Truly to pray. Maybe even if you didn't listen to 10 minutes with Jesus, no problem, as long as you're praying. And develop this true, honest relationship with the Lord Jesus. Maybe I would suggest be really faithful to your daily gospel, where Jesus will speak to you very personally. Pope Leo has dedicated his latest Wednesday audiences to speaking about the dogmatic constitution Dei Verbum, on divine revelation from the Second Vatican Council. It was promulgated in 1965 by Pope Paul VI. And in it, this constitution speaks all about our loving reading of the gospel, at its different levels, the literal level, the spiritual level, the allegorical level, sense, and the moral sense. These are all long-standing traditions in the church, and they can work. We can read the gospel slowly, lovingly, in a faith-filled way during Lent. Lord, speak to me during this Lent that is coming up through the gospel. And see, Lord, what are you going to tell me personally? Now that would be a good divine tradition to embrace. I thank you, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations you've communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you help to put them into effect. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.